I'm recording now, lesson 1. Welcome if you're just watching the recording. Thanks, Tom. But can somebody volunteer to be someone to just kind of keep an eye on the chat, and if there's something relevant happening, to raise their hand or flag me that I need. Tom won't be the person because he's going to forget. No problem. Chantal, you want to do it this class? Okay, so if something's happening in chat that I've missed, that I need to pay attention to, flag me. If it's just chatter happening or Madison starts talking about turnips again, don't flag me about that. All right, let's open up this.
Someone mentioned losing profit on turnips, and I just had to put the Animal Crossing reference.
Very important. You know, I do think it'd be really fun to design a lesson around Animal Crossing. It's a very fascinating
I'd be
game.
very down for that.
I know. I have all these master plans in my head. Okay. So I am going to now open up where we're going to go together. So in my lessons, if you have not had me teach before, it's going to be so nice to get to know you about. You're going to find that how I structure my Brightspace page generally is the same all the time. So I'm going to share my screen with you now. Okay, so within our Brightspace page, you're going to have your module and you're going to go there every week, and there's going to be an embedded lesson. This is created using Adobe Spark. So when you open it up, it's going to bring you to more of a website rather than a PowerPoint. We can ignore this printable version because I have to edit it. What I always make sure is available, usually before, and I'll do it after class, is that you have a printable version of the Adobe Spark, so that if you want to save it to your own computer, you can do so. I understand that it's really fussy to save on your end if I don't do that. So I'll make sure that there's a printable version of the lesson content available. Usually before class, your lesson content will be available. Today was just a strange day with it being Monday in week 1. It came up today, but moving forward, your lesson content will be available before class. So you can, if you want to go ahead on there and take a peek. Let's open it up together. So, the plan for today, we're going to quickly look at the course schedule. I'm not going to spend a load of time on it because I know you can do this on your own, but I just want to go quickly over it. I want to talk to you about the assignments you have for this course, and then we're going to get right into lesson content. I think it's a really, I love the topics we cover in this course, so I don't want to waste any time not talking about it. So let's look at our course schedule. This is what I follow. So if you're following this, you're on track with what I'm doing. You're going to find it in course information. So Brittany, was the questions around kind of when lessons are in the topics, those won't be in the calendar. So you'll want to make sure you pop back here if you're curious around the topics. So today we're going to start just talking about mental health promotion overall and what your role is as you're going into your second year placement. Hopefully this lesson will kind of set a bit of a foundation for you're going to work with other professionals. Then we're going to move into mental health states and symptoms. And then we're getting right into the diagnoses. So we're going to talk about trauma and stress related disorders. This course, we talk about obsessive compulsive disorder. You'll remember from Mental Health 1, we spent some time around anxiety. This time we're focusing more specifically on OCD. Then we're going to move into mood disorders of depression and bipolar disorder, then move into disordered eating, study break, and then our midterm. The remainder of the course, we're talking about early onset schizophrenia and psychosis. And then for 2 weeks, or I guess if we include that as a personality disorder, there were other 2 weeks, we're going to talk about cluster B personality disorders and cluster C personality disorders. It'll make more sense as we get into that lesson content. Then we move to self-harm and suicide and concurrent disorders. Okay. All right. So don't worry too much about what happens after study break. You don't want to overwhelm yourselves right now. You will see that we do have 3 assignments due before study break. So let's talk about those briefly. The first one is trauma-informed lens. My goal is to have you start working on that in class. That's an exercise you're going to be doing, not by yourself. You're going to work on that with pairs, and we'll probably get started in class week 4. Okay. And it'll relate to, in class week 3, and then it'll be due week 4. Then you have, I think, so kind of a cool assignment where you're going to be focusing primarily on depression. You're going to do a bit of a background research on that topic, but then you're going to come up with an infographic, a brochure, some type of tool that you could use when you're trying to explain depression to a young person. Okay, that's assignment number 2, and that is in groups. Assignment 3, bipolar disorder, is an individual assignment. Once we learn about bipolar disorder, you're going to have an opportunity to come up with your own metaphor for it. If you were having to explain to a colleague, to a young person, to a parent, what bipolar disorder is, using a metaphor. So again, a bit of research.
I'm really sorry, but Tom's asking a question about the BPD.
Thank you.
Oh no, he was answering me back.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, no problem. So we're going to do bipolar disorder, and then your midterm, so you know this and I'll repeat this, is going to cover weeks 1 through 7. Okay, so your midterm's focusing on everything before the break. If you're new to me, generally what I do is I post a checklist that helps guide your studying. We don't have a formal review class, but you'll have a mechanism to know what specifically you're going to want to study for the midterm. Sadie, yes.
Sorry, I just had a question about the midterm break.
Yeah.
Because we're in placement, I remember one of my teachers saying that we're gonna have a break the same time as the students. So they're having it in March. I'm just confused.
No, makes sense that you would be. So the study break is for the college. So in second year, if you're in a school setting, you'd likely be attending placement that week, but you won't have class.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, good. Then our final assignment is assignment 4, and that's going to focus on mental health literacy and really pull on your understanding of the personality disorders. And you're going to have an opportunity to kind of collect and pull together some resources so that you have it moving forward as a resource for yourself, and that's in groups. Okay, then we have
Victoria's asking about the due date for one of the assignments and whether or not it's going to be due on Family Day when it's in February.
Look at that. Yeah, no. Oh, we don't have class. Right. Thank you for pointing that out. Look at that. I didn't want to lose a class. I left it in. I'm going to get back to you on that, making myself a note. The answer is no, it won't be due on Family Day. So I will figure something out around week 7. Oh, look at that. Okay. Thank you for pointing that out. I don't have a due date on. Okay, great. Monday classes, I forget they happen. Come on Friday. Hey, Tom, not a bad question. Not a bad point. Do you have class on Fridays from 11 to 1?
So I meant Family Day by that.
Oh, not Friday.
Because we'll be in placement on Friday.
Oh yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to say, oh, come to my Friday class. You're right. Family Day, Friday. Yeah, placement. Got it. I coordinate third year placement, and it's totally different. Okay.
What about those that don't? Can we join in on the Friday class? So say those of us that are on the reduced course load list.
Yeah.
Can we attend that Friday class? And which day would it be if we are allowed to sit in on that?
Yeah, let me, you know what I might end up doing? I may just record a lesson and post it. I'm going to get back to you guys on that. That's 6-7 weeks away. So give me some time. I'm going to get back to you. Thank you for pointing that out. I super appreciate that because I totally missed it. Okay. So no class Family Day, no live class Family Day anyway. We'll still get the content to you that week though, because it's an important lesson. Okay. All right. So where are we now? Let's go back to our content. Okay, So lesson one content. Any questions though, other than the calendar question about the content, about the assignments before I move on? Okay, great. In the assignments tab, when you click all the assignments, you're going to see that there is a pretty thorough instructions and there's a rubric. So we'll talk more about it though as they come closer to date. Okay. You took mental health 1 with me last year, and now we're into mental health 2. When you think back to mental health 1, what has stuck with you, or what do you remember from that course that kind of stood out as far as helping your understanding, increasing your understanding of mental health, mental wellness, mental illness, disorders, diagnoses, symptoms? What are you bringing with you? Let's go, Chantal, then Tom, please.
For me, it was the fact that most teenagers are diagnosed with general anxiety disorder. And to me, that was really kind of eye-opening, because as a teenager, like I was left undiagnosed until I was 18. And even then I was still misdiagnosed for 10 years. So it's nice to know that we're now starting to actually realize that this starts young, and how it starts and how it goes from a general anxiety disorder to then specific personality disorders that they might have or they might develop further in the future. Okay, so the possibility of comorbidity between diagnoses, the value of early identification, and that early identification is becoming almost a bit more prevalent, which is great in service delivery. Good, great. Tom and Brittany, please.
So I would add on to Chantal's, the framework we learned around risk and I can't remember the other word for it, but like techniques for survival and then techniques for thriving, and how we had to like really view the two, and how the transition happens from, well, the basic framework for how taking a young person out of risk and survival into thrive territory. And I like that because it's kind of informed how I've looked at some of the kids I've worked with in placement, is that ability of like, okay, are they just surviving this or are they thriving in this?
Right.
Like, so that's something I've been looking at.
Good. So moving towards thriving, looking at risk and resilience factors, protective factors, and focusing our interventions around how do we cultivate that resilience, right? Awesome. Strength-based. I love it. Brittany.
So I wasn't on like the Zoom last year. I actually did the AC online, but what I learned was, I can't remember the word for it. It starts with an I, but I learned that like there is a lot that goes into like helping diagnose an individual with like anxiety or depression or whatever. You have like doctors, and you have like the CYCs, you have like the therapists. Like I can't remember the word, but it's like in something.
I think we're talking about it today. Interprofessional practice.
I think that's, and it was amazing to me that I'm like, okay, so like at some point all of these people have to work together, whether they're like, working with a child who's with CAS or, maybe in a group home, like all of these people have to come together and we have to learn how to navigate through it. It was really interesting for me to learn.
Good. Okay. You'll find yourself well prepared, I think, for today. And thank you for bringing that up, especially as most of you are going into placement and are going to be working with teachers, with the principal if they're actively involved, with parents, with social workers, with guidance. And it's quite layered, right? And we all have different roles. So good. I'm glad you're bringing that and you have that in mind. Anyone else? And feel free to use, in this class, I don't mind if people use chat, if that's more comfortable rather than popping in or raising your hand or using audio. That's fine for me in our classes together. If you'd like to use chat as your mechanism to communicate, that works for me. Okay, what about looking forward to? So mental health 2, we looked at the schedule and those topics we're going to cover. What which ones interest you the most? And I'd love to know why. If we look back to our weekly course schedule, I can pop it back up. What are you looking forward to, and how come? What about that topic interests you? Brittany, go ahead again, please, and then Chantal.
So I'm actually interested in all of it, just because like after I'm done this program, I want to continue to be a psychologist. So I am excited for everything, but the most thing I am excited for, actually, Tom answered it earlier, but is the cluster B one, because I myself suffer from borderline personality disorder, and it's just so nice to actually get a lot more insight and not just look through YouTube on Med Circle or whatever, and be like, oh, that's why I am the way I am. You know, it's nice to actually see the research and learn about, like, I don't know if we're going to be learning about the like DSM-10 or whatever, but I'm super excited for it. So
Good. Amy, OCD for you. Tom was agreeing with you. Brittany, Faith, yes, schizophrenia, a topic you may not know much about, but you may encounter in your practice. Good. Who have I missed? Anyone else want to? Disordered eating, Sky. Right. Large increase in eating disorders. CHEO has had to hire to respond to the need of young people who are being processed, for lack of a better word, through the Emerge department, and then referred to the eating disorder clinic, because it's been, you know, let me tell you, I wanted to do this, and I didn't think I could do it well enough. So I didn't embed it into all the lessons, but I think what we should keep at the forefront of our conversation is the impact of COVID on young people with any of these diagnoses. So you'll not find readings unless I find really good ones. But let's keep that in mind, because you're going to be going into the field. And the children and youth you're working within the schools at your placement, or if you're working part-time, have been significantly impacted. So let's keep that in the back of our mind, the impact that COVID has had. So thank you, Sky, for reminding me to think about that, think about it in that way. Chantal, go ahead, please.
For me, I'm okay. So one question: are we going to be learning anything about DID?
Not specifically. It may be more embedded in week 10, but not as its own lesson.
Okay. And second, it would be I'm really interested in learning about the OCD as well, because there's just so many different types and levels of OCD that people have. So for me, it's going to be really eye-opening, because like I know a few people that have been diagnosed as OCD, but they're not like the way that you see them portrayed, you know, where they're like flicking on and off lights because they think like the world's going to end if it, and I'm not making fun or poking fun, because that's not what I'm doing, but like, you know what I mean? That's how they're portrayed in the media and things like that. Whereas that's not the actual case.
Yeah.
With OCD. OCD is, it's an obsessive compulsive disorder, and that could be many things, and at different varying degrees. So I think that's going to be super eye-opening, because I feel like that all kind of ties in with like eating disorders, borderline personality disorder, you know, because you have the compulsion aspect, especially with the eating disorders, you know, the compulsion of controlling your eating, controlling the intake of food that you're taking in, what it is that you're eating, doing the binging and purging, if that's what you're doing, like, you know what I mean? So I think really learning about OCD is going to actually just open up the doors for a lot.
Good. And when you'll find in this course, as you get to know me, you'll know I subscribe to quite a pretty strong cognitive model of understanding mental health diagnoses, and we'll talk about the thought patterns and the thinking that permeates those obsessive behaviors. And yeah, it is a form of anxiety. Joshua, so nice to see you. Persistent depressive disorder. We will spend a lot of time talking about that, and you will get a lot of your own information as you do your assignment. So I'm glad you're interested in that. And where mental health got birth is not acknowledged. Looking forward to learning kind of about it all, and coming up with your own framework for understanding. Okay, good. Thank you for that answer. Eureka. This question is going to be one we talk about in one of the lessons about how media portrays certain more, what word do I want to use? Someone help me out.
Stigma?
Diagnoses that sensationalized. That was the word I was thinking of. I don't know if you knew I was even going there in my head because I didn't give you any clues, but but certain media does tend to sensationalize certain diagnoses and portrays it really inaccurately, and does a disjustice to it, injustice to it. So, okay, thank you for sharing that. Let's go into lesson content. I don't know about Sia's movie, so I'm curious to Google that when I'm done class. Eureka, tell me about it. Can you tell me?
It's a movie. Sorry, my voice is a little cracky still, but it's a movie about that just completely represents autistic people. Google it. There's a lot of articles about it. It is violent. It is just gross.
Is it new?
It's not new anymore, but it did come out within the last year.
Okay, thank you. All right, let me pop into the chat and then we'll switch gear. 2018. Okay, it was so bad. Okay, I'm seeing it's super garbagey. Okay, I'm gonna look into it. All right, so we're 2:38. Let's go till about 3. We'll see where we get, and we'll take a break and go from there. As we go through course content, I'm not making any promises. This isn't a promise that we're going to end before 5. We might. If we end before 5, there may be some exercises for you to do asynchronously on your own. I never know. I always plan for a 3-hour lesson, but it could go less, it could go more. I'm sort of guilty of it going more, but I will certainly not keep you beyond 5. And there may be times where we do end before 5. Okay. All right. So, have you learned yet, because I don't teach you in all your courses, about adverse childhood experiences? Does that terminology sound familiar to you? This is something you've learned about possibly in child development or with Andy? And if not, that's okay. You may not have gotten to it yet. I just don't want to repeat something if you've kind of already talked about it. Okay, all right. So let's, thanks, Rika. So when we're talking about adverse childhood experience, these are situations that many of the young people you work with are going to likely encounter. Let me just get a picture up here for you, so you can see what I'm talking about while I go through it. Okay. So we're talking about scenario situations in a child's early years that they've encountered that are going to have an impact on their well-being, on whether they have certain diagnoses. I'm just plugging in my computer here. And we're talking about something that could happen early on in life, a traumatic brain injury. It could be a mental health diagnosis they have, whether it's depression, anxiety, suicide, post-traumatic stress disorder, whether it's something that was problematic when they were in utero, was an unintended pregnancy or complications during birth, that can cause problems later on in that young person's life. HIV, cancer, health diagnoses that makes it difficult for them to use Tom's word from earlier, to thrive and not encounter any substantial barriers. Alcohol and drug use, unsafe sex, and education, income, poverty, those are going to be elements that are going to have an impact on a child as they are developing, as they are finding their way in the world, and they're developing these thoughts and beliefs about themselves, others, and the world, and where they stand. So there are factors that can impact their ability to reach optimal well-being without support. With support, it's quite possible. So you're going to be, when you're in the field, working with children who may have a mental health diagnosis, may have experienced an adverse childhood experience, and you're going to see how it's impacting their behaviors, how they do in a classroom, how they're processing information, how they're thinking about themselves, others in the world, and how they're doing from a mood state. Okay. What's really important to know is these young people probably don't yet have communication or coping strategies to navigate what is happening inside. And that's where we come in as CYCs, as we can provide the tools, we can provide that understanding, we can provide that relationship that helps them see, okay, maybe I can develop coping strategies. Maybe I do have meaning. Maybe I am important. Maybe I do matter, right? So I want to ask you though, as we go into it, how prepared you feel going into the field working with children and youth who may have a mental health diagnosis such as anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder. There is no right or wrong answer to this question. I've launched a poll here. How prepared do you feel knowing that you're going to be working with this complex array of young people? Do you feel very prepared? Feel okay? Yeah, I feel prepared somewhat. Or not yet prepared. Because the nature of this course, we talked about it in Mental Health 1, is that concept of mental health literacy. The more you know about a topic, the more prepared you are to support young people who are also coping with it in real time, in real life. And when you are more well-versed on a topic, you can actually help young people understand what they're going through. That's really important. Last call for the poll. If anyone wants to contribute. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, let's end this poll. So 2 are feeling very prepared. Some are feeling prepared. The most, if we're looking statistically, are feeling kind of somewhat prepared. And some are not yet prepared. And again, no right or wrong. Would anyone like to share why they chose what they did? Why were you leaning towards that answer? We'll go Brittany, Chantal, if you want to comment in the chat, I have that open as well. Go ahead, Brittany.
Okay, sorry, my camera's not turning on for some reason. I apologize. But yeah, so I put that I was feeling prepared, just because, like I said, like I have been very passionate about mental health for a very, very long time, and even before I applied for Algonquin, I watched Med Circle like crazy, and they're all legal psychologists and psychiatrists that talk about different mental health like diagnosis and stuff like that, and that's actually where I first found out that I had BPD. I was watching one of the psychologists on there, and I was like bawling my eyes out, and I just, since then, I've been watching all the videos. I research everything, so I do know quite a good chunk. I just, you know, I'm not licensed to really be able to say stuff, so I'm really feeling prepared because I do know a bit of stuff, so, you know, advice-wise and whatnot, I think I'm prepared enough to know the little cues and clues and stuff, so.
Okay, so feeling prepared to be able to identify perhaps what some behaviors you're seeing that may start you thinking, this could be indicative of a certain diagnosis. Okay, I see. I'm going to come to you in the chat, but let's go Cameron, please.
Yeah, like I said that I felt very prepared because like I personally dealt with a lot of mental health issues from like a young age, and also went through the same thing with like my younger brother. So I kind of know how it presents in younger children, and also like personal experience. I know how to like, or even if someone maybe didn't necessarily deal with it properly with me, I know like what I would change. And so like how I would better interact with someone who might be younger, who's dealing with something. So I think like my personal experience and like working with people who are like closer to me throughout my life has definitely prepared me to work with kids of like a variety of ages with a variety of different things, because I have a little bit of everything, just a little sprinkle.
Right.
It all.
Cameron, let me ask you a question. I'm going to ask actually to those of you who self-disclose your own experience with diagnoses. Do you think there is a pro and a con to having a lived experience with a diagnosis? And I'll start with Cameron, if you'd like to answer. What do you think that is?
I mean, I definitely think it's a pro. I mean, there's definitely pros and cons, I think. But I think it's definitely a pro, especially working with younger kids, because like you kind of know how to like broach certain topics that would like actually be helpful, especially if you've had negative experiences with folks who haven't necessarily taken you seriously or like dealt with it properly, you know, like what not to do, which is something that oftentimes people have to like learn by trial and error.
Mhm.
You already have that kind of like experience. So I
Okay.
think that's definitely a pro, but I mean, there could be there's definitely cons as well. Like
Okay.
you might just relate to them too much and that could cause some problems. But yeah, I think there's definitely pros and cons to both.
Good comment around being perhaps on the receiving end of a stigma or a judgmental response, a judgmental comment, a judgmental experience, and that staying with you as it being, oh, that's going to be something I'm very mindful of and won't repeat. Good. Thank you for that. Let's go. I lost track of when it came. I think Brittany, Chantal, then Tom, please.
Okay, so I think there are quite a few pros, if I'm being honest. As it was already mentioned, but like if you already experience like mental health yourself, you know kind of what not to do as what others may have done to you in the past. Like, you know, growing up, like my parents may have been like, oh, you're just, you know, you're being lazy, you're just lying. No, I'm just freaking depressed. You know, I don't want to lie in my room. So if a child seems like they're sleepy in class or they're acting out or they're irritated, it's not that they're just like, oh, they just have bad behavior. No, they may be depressed. They may be this, they may be that. And again, like having like BPD and stuff, like I'm very empathetic. I feel others' emotions. So I know that I will feel 10 times as much as somebody else who might just be, I'm just kind of pissed off. No, I'm raging, you know? So if a child's acting out and there's a history of that, like I'll know what to look for and I can kind of help them like, look, this is how you might be able to not be as angry. Try doing this like breathing and stuff like Andy told us. Like, so having personal experience from these things might be able to help like you teach them and navigate them through these emotions so they're not as like alone or feeling like nobody understands them. I think the cons would probably be that having these mental health issues like yourself or ourselves or whatever, it might get in the way. Like, you know, you might be very irritated yourself because you might have like, you know, let's say really bad ADHD. So I get really irritated. I get sensory overload. So if a child's screaming and crying, instead of like lashing out, I'm gonna have to remember like, no, we don't do that. Just, okay, listen, I understand you're upset. Please calm down or whatever. Instead of being like, can you just stop screaming? You know, like, so I think that would be a con, learning to
Regulation of your own symptoms and access to perhaps a repertoire of tools that may be helpful to the young people you're working with. Okay, good. Chantal, then Tom.
So yes, there's the pros where like we can teach them coping skills that we have been able to learn ourselves that have helped us. So we have a bit of an arsenal going in to the situation. But I also think that there's a big con to it as well, especially at such a young age, because Dr. Google has become everybody's friend. And everybody likes to go online. Everybody likes to read about their diagnosis. And I find that that's a super big con because you're reading about somebody else's experience. That's somebody else's experience. It's not how you're going to experience things. That's, you know what I mean? Like, perfect example. I was just diagnosed ADHD. Okay. However, my husband Craig is very like, because when he was a kid, they were all like, oh, he needs Ritalin because like, you know, they were trying to shove pills down his throat. And he was like, hey man, like, I don't want anything to do with that. Even to this day, he's very like, I don't believe in ADHD. Like he does not, he's a firm non-believer. Okay. As much as it's neither here nor there. But my point is that so the other day we were listening to a podcast and we were listening to like how certain things relate to ADHD and how like, you know, you're high functioning, but like you're constantly all over the place. You're like doing 6 things at once and you never finish anything and all the rest of that. And I was like, see, that's exactly how I am. But then we were watching it's a YouTube channel. They will kill you, but it's like different things. Okay. But anyways, so we were listening to it and one of the people that they happened to have been talking about was the sister of Sylvia Likings. And if anybody knows who Sylvia Likings is and that whole story, I was like, oh my God, like that's her older sister. I had no idea. And Craig turned to me and he's like, how can you tell me that you have ADHD, but yet you remember these little minute details about these things? And I'm like, boom, like that is ADHD, is paying attention to the things that you like. And you're able to remember these things because they're things that you like and you have interest in. So
It's
to
a
me,
good point, Chantel, because what you're highlighting, I think, and I'm just going to bring it
Yeah.
to a nutshell, is that while we believe we may have an understanding of a diagnosis, we can't know everything about it. What we understand about our own diagnosis might actually not be relevant, especially when you're looking at a diagnosis where there are multiple different categories within it. So to be mindful that we must be open to new information, but also seek out reputable, valid information, I think is where you were going. Tom, I'm just gonna go, someone said something here that relates, and similar to that, to not make it was Amy mentioned it, but to not assume a strategy is going to work with one person because it worked with another or for yourself. Tom, go ahead, please.
So all great points beforehand, both positive and, I don't want to say negative, but adverse. I would add that, the positive is we're able to relate on a level that isn't understood.
Yeah.
There's depth, there's experience, there's maybe a lot more genuine empathy versus sympathy. And then unknowing sympathy, maybe.
Yep.
And then the other issue I would add for a con or an adverse aspect to it would be maybe seeing things that aren't there.
Yeah.
Or too hyperfixated on things and going, oh, this, like, it was missed in me, therefore, this person, let's not miss it. Like, we have to watch that we're not overdoing it as well.
Yeah.
And having those structures in place so that we're not waving the flag when we don't need to.
Yeah.
And that's an important aspect too. So and then the other one I think was already brought up, but was the attachment aspect of just, we struggled, so we don't want to let the kids struggle, so we may get overly invested and then hurt our own self-care. So
good. I like that. That's a really good point. That overinvestment, that over personalization, that could become painful for us, right? And I also, if I can kind of extend your point a little bit around one, there's a diagnosis, specifically one that's perhaps personality disorder, say, or depression, that's not necessarily neurological, like autism or ADHD. We know that certain scenarios cultivate or exacerbate a diagnosis, say, of a borderline personality disorder. But to be careful not to make those assumptions that what my childhood experience was like, or what my attachment relationships were like, or what my home life was like, that exacerbated my symptoms and led to my diagnosis, may not be happening in the life of that youngster you're working with in high school. So that those parents may be completely different than your experience with your parents or caregiver. So to tease out your personal experience, Tom, you said a word, depth, and I got that resonated for me, because I will never have that intense experience of a young person I work with bipolar disorder. I won't feel that experience. I don't have the diagnosis, right? So that depth of understanding that's so uniquely personal, I won't have. I was going somewhere on that, but anyway, I don't know. I lost my point. I got myself distracted. But that word stood out for me, I think, was the point I was making, that when you come with a diagnosis, you have that, but it can also get in your way because it's so innately personal. Victoria, and then I'm going to get to some of the comments up here that were not related to my question that I posed, but that were really good points. Victoria, go ahead, please.
I have something similar to what Chantel had as well. When it comes to like music, I'll say like, oh yeah, this is this song. Oh yeah, this is that song. If it comes to like the artist of that song, I would not know it. I wouldn't really know the artist, but if I hear like the song, I'm like, oh yeah, it's this song.
Right, that selective attention,
Mhm.
right?
And my mom and her boyfriend was like saying like, oh, why don't you spend more time studying? Why don't you do this? I'm like, it's hard. There's a difference. Music is more easier for me than studying.
You know what, you raise an important point. I think that's so relevant to anyone who has any symptom of any diagnosis, is we can't make an assumption of anything. And if that's what we take away, that's the most important. We need to seek to understand from that life view, that point of view, that lived experience of the person we're working with, not an assumption we make, even because we've read a DSM manual and worked with depression for years and years and years. We still can't make that assumption that we know how that person's experiences. Let me shift gears, Faith. You said this a while back around you brought up a point around the age group. So preparedness can also differ depending on what age group you have had experience with. And what we know is most of the diagnoses we cover in mental health 2 are diagnosed more often in adolescents versus younger children. That's what we covered in mental health 1. So that has something to do with the topics that you're more comfortable with. Shanae, please.
So I actually have not been diagnosed with anything, but struggle with a lot of things that people are sharing. And I myself have dabbled in readings and feel that a lot of these quote unquote diagnoses and disorders just seem to be evolutions of upbringings, especially considering that a lot of us are coming into this field based upon our own childhood experiences. So I feel like a lot of this is miscategorized and mislabeled so that we feel a certain way, so that we have to continue a band-aid to each generation. So I feel like we really can start more of a change in not making them feel like there's something wrong with them.
Yeah. Shanae, save that. I want to hear more from you next week because we're talking about norms, deviance, labels, what that means. Are they needed? How valuable are they? When do they get in the way? How do they help us understand diagnoses? How do they kind of bias us to understanding? So can you keep wherever your brain is going now and bring it next week too?
Oh, all the time. I wrote a paper about it last semester.
Perfect. Okay, good. Because that's where we're going next week. We're talking more about that. So thank you for bringing that up. It's incredibly valid. Amy, please.
I think definitely like with what Shanae was saying, like not letting the diagnosis define the character of the person. And I find that seems to happen a lot in like where I work, because I work at like a camp for kids on the spectrum. And so we have kids ranging from 4 to like 14. And so dealing with all of the different kids is like very different. But at the end of the day, like we don't look at them and say like, oh, because they have an autism diagnosis, we have to deal with them this way. And because their outbursts are always this way, this is how they're always going to act.
Mm-hmm.
And we find that a lot of parents have a lot of difficulty dealing with that because they see like their kids having a certain behavior and other kids not, but they have the same diagnosis. And so it's a lot of like also educating the parents as well as like the individuals that you're working with.
You got it. And there's value, right? In that we know that certain interventions align very well with certain diagnoses. So we build on that, but to not make the assumption that they're always going to work the same way or be received the same way, or there may be an underlying condition or something else going on that's going to get in the way. Good. Nikki, and then I'm going to wrap up the comments in the chat and we'll take a break. Nikki, go ahead, please.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah, yes.
Sorry, it's muted. That's awkward. Just to build on what was just said, I remember like one of the first things I think it was like intro to child and youth care, one of the first things like Steph taught us was damn, I lost my train of thought. Oh, like to focus on the symptoms rather than the diagnosis, because like the diagnosis could be like incorrect, and what you want to do, and even within a diagnosis, is so much different ways a person, like it's still so individualistic, each of the experiences. So you want to focus on their experience rather than the diagnosis itself. And I think that's a good
Yeah.
I don't know. Sorry, I lost.
No, it's great. And it
point.
aligns really well with I think where Shanae was going as well. And that when we see symptomology, it may be displayed differently too. So no, you're right. You're right on track there. Let's wrap up the chat, and then we'll take a break and come back to the lesson content. Iman was saying around kind of that not necessarily enough knowledge. So not feeling that prepared, and then worried without, maybe I don't have the knowledge or experience. I might say something that's interpreted wrong, and I don't want to do that. That's another reason that there may be a bit of hesitancy. That practical field experience you're going to get this term is going to be so valuable for having you, maybe you have your own lived experience with a diagnosis, feel more prepared to address a variety of people with the same diagnosis, but where it's displaying differently. If I've missed anything here, I apologize. I'll read through it at break and I'll come back to it. So why don't we take a 10-minute break? It's 3:03. If we come back at 3:13, we'll continue on with the lesson activities. Okay, thanks. I'm here, but I'm gonna stop recording, and please feel free to. Okay, so let's talk about CYCs and why your role is so important. Your job when you're in the field working one-on-one in the life space of these young people is going to be to gather that information through observation. When you have an understanding of diagnoses, which we're going to spend most of the class, the remainder of the course talking about, you're going to get an idea of what to look for. And someone said this earlier, I apologize, the name isn't coming. But what do certain behaviors mean? Are certain behaviors you're observing when pieced together a picture of a larger mental health diagnosis that warrants further assessment? Or is it simply a reaction to a situation that is a one-off, right? We know that in order for anything to be a diagnosis, it has to occur over a period of time and consistently. That's what makes it distinct. And again, we'll talk more about this next week when we talk about mood states. So in a school setting, as you are walking around, helping a young person with math, helping a young person stay focused, taking a young person out in the hall for a body break, those observations you're going to be making are so valuable because they're going to inform direction of IEPs, potentially direction of treatment plans, direction of interventions, because it's going to give a really big picture on how a young person is functioning. There's a really good way of looking at it. Your role as being a gatekeeper, really, in that provision of mental health care. You're going to see those indicators before a teacher is going to likely see them because they are observing 28 students, whereas a CYC in a classroom may be working with the young people who need your support more, right? So that observation you're doing, when it's informed with really concrete assessment information you have based on your knowledge of diagnoses, is going to benefit greatly. Mental health promotion is where you come into play. A lot of the programs you're going to develop, if they're prevention programs, that's a form of mental health promotion. Anything that's going to reduce risk or prevent a symptom from flaring, perhaps, or prevent a symptom from getting worse, those elements that you can integrate into your practice are going to make a difference for young people who have a diagnosis. Whether it's a concrete diagnosis, let me say this for a second, because not every young person you work with is going to come to the classroom with a diagnosis. They could be waiting. I have many friends whose children are still waiting for their own psychoed assessments, and they're going to the private route because within the school system, it takes time for assessments to occur. So they may or may not have a diagnosis. So it's going to be important as you are looking, and we said this earlier, we're not necessarily even, well, we want to know about the diagnosis because there are certain evidence-informed interventions that pair with the diagnosis. We want to see how is a symptom I'm seeing getting in that kid's way. And when I can see how that symptom is having a negative impact on their optimal functioning, what can I do as a CYC to make things a little easier, to help that young person develop a system, a skill, a tool to navigate what is getting in their way, okay? In a school setting, you are going to be at the front view of so many behaviors. As a CYC in a classroom where the teacher is the one responsible for that room, you may not always have, you likely will not have you certainly won't have complete say, but you likely may not have a great say in the direction of the intervention. So what your real important role is providing that assessment and observation information to those that are forming the intervention plans. In a perfect ideal world, you are part of that plan. And when we talk about interprofessional teams, we're going to talk about how CYCs have such a value on a larger team providing mental health services to young people. But ultimately in a classroom, you're going to find that the teacher generally has more control over the milieu and the structure and the rules within that space. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to do a bit of work here in breakout rooms. What it's going to involve is there's a short video I'm going to ask you to watch. What I'd like you to do is take note of any indicators that you are seeing of distress the young person is demonstrating right from the beginning till the end. Or potential mental health needs that you think, hey, I want to know a bit more about that. Things that you're seeing that might require further assessment. Then I want you to think about, within a school setting, what other professionals can you think of that might be able to support this young person? And then finally, in your group, decide on somebody who's willing to bring the information back and share it. And then what we'll do within all our groups is we'll share and build off each other. I'm going to say to take about, I'm going to say 15 minutes for this exercise. The best way to do this is when you go into your breakout room, choose one person to share their screen and play the video. Choose one person to take notes on a Google Doc, because then you can share the Google Doc and see what everyone's writing, and then use that to bring it back. So if you're the presenter, you have access to the Google Doc to share the thoughts that your group have. Okay, so to recap, I'm going to open up the breakout rooms. You're going to go to a breakout room. You're going to watch the video that's linked here. When you click here for the video, I'll post, actually, let me post the direct link here in the chat. Then you're going to make note of the indicators of distress, mental health needs you're seeing, and then what professionals at that school might be able to support the young person, okay? Any questions before I open up the breakout rooms?
So that link, when you click it, it brings me to a screen that says, give me 1 second here.
Yeah.
Log into Adobe Creative Cloud Express.
Yes. Thanks, Chantal. Let me stop sharing and I'm going to give you another link that's going to work. Thanks for pointing that out. That's always helpful. Okay, I'll log in. I'll give you the direct link here. Sign in. So this will take, I'm thinking 15 minutes. So we are at 3:20 now. So we return at 3:20, 3:40. Let's say 3:45. If you are done sooner, head on back. If it seems like everyone's done sooner, we'll pick it up once everyone's back. But we'll give you until 3:45 to complete it. I'm getting the video now for you. Here we go. When you go into your breakout room, this chat will disappear. So before you go to your breakout room, please click that link or copy the link or go to the lesson content and you'll find it there. All right, so recap, you're watching the video, you're answering the questions, and you're bringing it back to the larger group. Breakout rooms are, I'm gonna recreate them now because I've heard some people leave. Recreate. Okay, so they're open, head there. If you need me, send a message and I will pop into your room. All right. Sierra Madison, okay, you're good. Jenna, Mesa, or Madison, if you need help getting somewhere, you let me know. Mesa's good. So I think what I'll do is I'll ask if a group would like to go first. Are there any people who are willing to go? And maybe in the interest of time, what we'll do is we will go to, let me think how we want to do this. Maybe I'll ask for one question from each group that presents. And then what we'll do is, of course, you can pop in and fill in the blanks if something you wanted to add didn't get said. Let's do that. Okay, so Chantal's group, do you want to let me know who you were with? And go ahead and answer question number 1.
Okay, so we were with, there was both Victoria's and Eureka as well. So that was the 4 of us. So for the first question, it says make a note of any of the indicators of distress or potential mental health need. So we noticed the youth was sighing, tapping at the pencil. They hit the back of the head of that one student who was just peacefully doing her work. Leaving their desk, getting up abruptly and leaving their desk, speaking back to their instructors, knocking over the chair. There were other youth laughing as the child went to go back to the timeout area, and they put their head down and was just very what's the word I'm looking for? It begins with an S. Sunken, sullen.
Dejected.
Yeah, dejected. There. Thank you. There we go.
Yeah.
And then when they went to go out for recess, it was the same thing. They got up, they were slouched shouldered and went out very just uncomfortably and sad.
Okay, so excellent signs picking up on that dysregulation and that progression of agitation. You saw it really swing, and then you saw it swing right back. Would another group like to add? Was there anything you picked up on, you noticed that this group didn't say? Okay. Thanks, Iwan. I love the actual body language. It's amazing. Yeah, you almost, when you're a CYC in a classroom and you hear that sigh, that's your first indicator that there's a dysregulation happening. And Chantal, I really like how your group connected it to, and Eureka gave us that word of that feeling dejected. You can almost track back where that dysregulation is coming from. It's not necessarily from a intentional acting out conduct disorder type of behavior. What we're seeing is there's this internal difficulty staying regulated because probably there's a lot of distressing thoughts happening, distressing how they're holding it in their body, and it just needs to come out, right? So that sigh when you're in the classroom is everything. And as I was watching the video, as soon as you got near that chair, I was like, he's kicking it. He's kicking that chair, right? And so as a CYC, you take stock of your milieu, and you perhaps slowly and calmly just move the chair out of that way. But good, excellent. Okay, second question though. Now let's bring it back to the content around what other professionals might come into play for this young person. So I guess which group would Emma, great, with the hand up, thank you.
So my group was me, Sky, Tom, and Meja, and we said that other professionals in the school that might be able to support the youth would be like a CYC or a teacher's assistant, a guidance counselor, or any other hall monitors, or literally just any other adult that could maybe take this child to just give him a break, as you could clearly see that he just needed a break between these transitions of activities.
Right. Acknowledging that now this young person is going potentially to another classroom, feeling dysregulated, going out to recess, feeling perhaps dejected, angry, frustrated, while we saw them go to their timeout spot, just they called it that. I'm not calling it, but they called it the timeout spot. You didn't see any opportunity for that young person to regulate. You didn't see an opportunity for that young person to even reconcile some physiological calming. We saw them sit, and it was a very quick return to the chair. And I thought, oh, not sure what's going to happen now, but then the bell rang. So yeah, good. Thank you. Thank you, Emma. What do you think the value is of adding those people, a person? You said kind of to help them get to a place or another. Anyone else want to add into that? What the value might be, or if there's another helping professional that Emma's group didn't think of? Chantel, go ahead, and then I'll watch for others.
So in the younger grades, they're actually lucky enough now to have a mandatory ECE in their classes. Thankfully, the school board has started to open up the possibility for more ECEs and CYCs to be joining their classes for this specific reason, because the teacher, for when I was in school, it seemed like the teachers just really wanted to assert their dominance essentially and take control of the class. So they are very authoritarians. You know what I mean? They're the authoritarian type of people. Whereas the ECEs and the CYCs, they have an opportunity to actually just go and kind of be more of along the calm lines with that child, whereas like the teacher, when they're speaking to the child, they still have to make sure that they keep control of like the overall class and everything else, you know what I mean? So I find that they're very, in a sense, power driven when they go to speak to them. But when an ECE or a CYC goes to talk to them, they're more talking to them. They're not talking at them, they're talking to them. And I think there's that
you bring up the point around roles, right? And the nature of that role, because we have CYCs, and we'll get to this, where our role is so relational. That's our jam. That's what we are. That's how we do our job. And if we don't do that, our job isn't effective. Whereas a teacher's role is to teach, maintain order of that classroom. So whether or not they like the power and the authority they have, that's actually the role they're responsible for delivering, right? Because they have, say they have 28 kids and they have those 28 sets of caregivers or parents who expect them to teach their child. Then they have potentially 10 to 12 IEPs. And so they're trying to adjust their teaching. Their job isn't in, unfortunately, based on the school system we have, their job isn't necessarily relational in that's not the primary intention. Teachers that are relational go far, and they're great. But when we look at distinguishing roles, teacher has a lot of other responsibilities that as a CYC in that room, we don't have. So we don't have to worry about that. So we often, I hear this a lot, and I think I can say this pretty comfortably. I have a friend, she's a CYC, but she's a teacher now. And she's always frustrated because she knows what that child actually needs, but she has to teach her class. And so she's in this. So as you go into your placements, to kind of almost take that sort of assumption you have that teachers are more kind of power over the classroom and put it aside, because there's a lot of responsibilities they have within that setting that we don't. So we can focus on getting to know that young person, right? So just something to think about. Makes it hard, makes their job difficult, but it speaks to those different roles we have. Thank you for that. Okay, thank you, Emma's group. And then the other question I want to add is, in this situation, what would be, and I don't have it, so I'm just going to make it up here. What would the value of having different professionals be for this person, for this young person? Where is there a value of having a teacher, a CYC, an EA, maybe a guidance counselor, a gym teacher? What does that bring to this young person that a teacher alone can't, or a CYC alone can't? Chantal, I'm going to see if anyone else wants to pop in, and then I'll absolutely go ahead. Okay, resources, availability of resources, brilliant. Let's go, Brittany, and then Iman, please.
I'm thinking maybe like the personal one-on-one relation that you can have with that student, focusing just on them and talking with just them versus like having to speak to a whole class and not having time for each individual.
Yeah, that time, right, to really afford that genuine, authentic space for that young person that we can't always offer when we have multiple? Yeah, good. Thank you. Iman.
I was going to say different kinds of support, because probably that students need some time at the gym to vent off, or sometimes with an EA to sit down and talk about things, with the CYC to communicate and form a different type of relationship. So that's why they need different types of professionals who help.
Yeah, I love that. We know that when someone is dysregulated, more often than not, they need a co-regulator. If you think back to our dysregulation in mental health one, they need that person to help them regulate by being that presence, by modeling, by being there. So having someone who can take them to the gym, take them in the hall, affords that other adult who has the time, right? And who can do that. I love it. I love it. Tom, different perspectives on how something should be handled. I can tell you how I think something could be handled is probably different than some of you would, right? And no one is right. What we all have to do is try our best, use the knowledge we have, and try and respond in the correct way. But Iman's how she intervenes may be totally different than how I would, but there's huge value in that, right? Or that Maddie would, or that Godbreath would, right? That's huge, different perspectives. I love that. Tom, and then I'm agreeing it. Okay, good. Okay, excellent. All right, so let's carry on. Thank you for doing that. I'm going to just skip through this one, but what I'm going to flag for you is think back to when we did psychology in year one, level one, and we talked about those 4 goals, right? We want to be able to describe behavior. What are we seeing objectively? We want to bring in what we're learning about diagnosis, and we want to say, okay, are these any symptoms that I need to be more mindful of? Are any of these symptoms I'm observing indicative of acute stress, acute danger, right? That's why we want to use this information. What am I seeing? Then we want to be able to explain what we're seeing in a really concrete, informed way. This is when we want to move then to predicting. When do I think this young person is going to get frustrated from sitting, do a big sigh, find a reason to get up and move around, and then be disruptive? What can I think back to has happened earlier in that day that might help me predict what I'm going to see? And then once I understand that, once I've been able to describe it accurately, understand and explain the behavior, predict when it's likely to occur, I'm going to put something into place to help shape it, to help control and alter it. So as you're working with young people, you're going to want to make sure that you are in your mind, even if you keep it on like a little notepad on your phone or something, you want to always be seeking to attain these 4 goals of psychology when we're trying to understand behavior. Because if we move too quickly to step 4, and we want to control or alter the behavior when we haven't adequately explained it, or we don't even have a really good description or understanding, we've missed some steps. So we always want to first seek to understand and explain. Then we want to time and predict, and then we want to move towards our strategy. So just for your own, if you want to do this after class or just in your own brain, thinking back to this young person we saw in the video, how might those 4 goals apply, and what would you do at the different stages? How might you alter it? Oh, maybe, yeah. He acted out in a way to get what he needed. And Tom, I thank you for making that point. When we see any type of behavior that appears as maladaptive, that appears to be contravening a norm within our classroom, within our space, that's telling us something. There's always a function to that behavior, right? So we want to be seeking to explain the function of that behavior so that we can adequately intervene. I'm just going to turn on a light behind me because it's getting very dark in here. Okay. All right. Okay, so interprofessional collaboration. This is that word we were talking about at the very beginning. So these are skills that we have as CYCs that we're going to take with us in order to work with other professionals who are providing services to the same clients that we are, to the same young people that we are. The more we can collaborate, the better the outcomes are for the young people we're working with. If we aren't successful in collaborating, or we don't value interprofessional collaboration, there's a risk in suboptimal outcomes, not good outcomes, but there's also a risk of, in some cases, there's a risk of death or real danger to a client if we are not working collectively together. Because why? Why do you think that is? Why might there be a danger or the outcomes not be as positive if we are not working collaboratively with other professionals? Brittany, please.
Well, certain professionals obviously have certain education that others may not. So a doctor is going to know more about like health stuff for a client than a CYC would for like behavioral or self-regulation. So working together, you can kind of get all of that in one big bite. You know what I mean? Instead of doing it separately, I'm not going to know what to do for, you know, what a counselor or a therapist or a psychologist or a doctor or a police officer might know and be able to do.
Right. So valuing that expertise actually gives you a whole data bank of information you can use as you're supporting the young person. Good. Anything else come to mind for others? Why not collaborating might be dangerous, might be suboptimal. The downside of not collaborating interprofessionally. Tom.
I'd add like missing out on different perspectives. So like my thought is like, when this a doctor, I was like, okay, like I have no idea what it's like to live with a uterus. So, you know, I might overlook something or not be told something because I'm perceived as someone not having one. Therefore, a child I'm working with might not open up, or I might not see the same level of worry someone with a uterus would.
Brilliant. You know what I like about that? I like two things about that, Tom. I like that the first one is you spoke about someone might interpret a symptom as being more meaningful or more impactful or more related to a negative outcome than you would, simply because of not having that knowledge. But I also picked up on that you said, I think, I might not, you might not have meant this, but that young people are going to tell different people different things based on their relationship, based on their perspective of that person. So the more people we have working collaboratively and confidentially, the more information we get. Good. Victoria, then Chantal, please.
I would say like a breach of confidentiality. Maybe there's like some stuff like the person didn't want to be mentioned. And if you like accidentally mention it and you're like, oh shit, I shouldn't have done that.
Yeah. What a good point you've made. When you're working interprofessionally, so this is a tricky one because when you're working interprofessionally, that can mean different agencies. So simply because you're both, so thank you for bringing this up, simply because many providers are working with the same client doesn't give us permission to talk to the other provider without informed consent from the young person we're working with. Sometimes even internally say you're at a community resource center and I'm seeing the young person in counseling services, but they're accessing the EC, the early childhood drop-in and the food bank. I don't have a right without informed consent to communicate about that collective care without that person's consent. So thank you for bringing that really important part up, that we can't assume consent, but there's a huge value we get it, because the more consent we get and the more open we can communicate, the better the service outcomes are going to be. But there is a caveat that I worked with young people who've said, I'm going to tell you this, I don't want to tell any of the other CYCs on staff, and it doesn't impact service delivery. It doesn't impact background history. It doesn't have a massive impact on anything. There's things you don't have to tell if the young person asks you not to, and there's not an impact on service delivery or outcomes in that respect. So good. Chantal.
I'm also thinking like if there's violent tendencies in the child, as a CYC, I might know that that kid resorts to throwing fists before sitting down and talking about things. And that teacher, it's first day of school, they're say they're changing grades.
Yeah.
And like, so say you're leaving intermediate and you're going off into high school, two totally different institutions right there. That's first. Second, that new teacher that's taking on that student, say from math class, has no idea about how this person responds to certain things like confrontation.
So you're so right. And imagine how nice it is for that youth if the new adult they're getting to know has a bit of a background on what works and what doesn't work. So while it does make the other service provider's job probably less conflictual too, it also sets a stage where, with permission of the young person, we can say, hey, this doesn't really work for this young person because of their history, because of what's going on. This is what I've tried and it's worked really well. Then you're giving information that enhances service delivery. And that's the goal with interprofessional communication. You want to enhance service delivery through sharing of information, through collaborative goal setting, through collaborative planning. And we'll talk a bit more about that in a second. When we're looking at mental health services, there's a lot of different programs that are out there. I mean, this one author I read distinguishes it between primary care, secondary care, and tertiary care. So primary care is that mental health promotion, that prevention, perhaps the prevention of exacerbation of a diagnosis, early identification of symptoms, or crisis care, rapid access to care. Then we have secondary care, and this is post-primary care services. So once an assessment has been completed, there are certain programs that a young person would be referred to. And I think you can probably see yourself as a CYC in either of these settings so far, right? You might be in Dave Smith Center where they're supporting a young person with substance use. You may have been at a Western Auto Resource Center and did an assessment that helped the young person get there. So secondary care looks at longer term ongoing services, and then tertiary care is at more complex, whether it's inpatient treatment for those young people or people that have the highest needs or severely complex diagnosis. So you're going to encounter different service providers at all of these different settings. So you're going to want to get well versed in the roles of people you're going to be working with. So interprofessional collaboration is going to occur everywhere. It's an ongoing, active, and shared process. So simply because, say you're working at a resource center, you make a referral, the young person accesses Dave Smith Center, that isn't to say that you are now engaged in interprofessional collaboration. At that stage, it was a static referral to a service that was needed. Where it can become more robust and become interprofessional collaboration is where you might have an ongoing working relationship with that youth. You know they're now accessing Dave Smith services, as an example, to have some consent to be able to work together to support that young person. That young person feels buoyed up by supports they have around them. So interprofessional collaboration is working together and jointly. While you may have different tasks, different roles, when we talked about teachers and the CYC in the classroom, you're still working together, you're working jointly. There's a common goal. It is complex because you may have different governing bodies. The doctor, in Tom's example, may have a different governing body than a social worker at the school does, than a teacher does. CYCs, you don't have one yet, right? We may have different responsibilities based on our role. It involves intentional sharing. So it doesn't mean I'm going to share everything with the service provider I'm collaborating with. What it means is I'm going to share information that is going to impact service delivery and positive service outcomes, or Chantal, as you said earlier, may contribute to risk. I'm going to share that information. I'm likely going to engage in problem solving with this other professional. We're going to make some decisions together that make sense to make together if it's about a joint outcome. We're going to have a way to communicate regularly. My support to the young person is going to benefit them, and their support to the young person is going to benefit me. And we share risks and responsibilities, and we coordinate the work. So it's not necessarily all one service provider or not, right? To be an effective collaborator, so yourself as a CYC on that team, important that you know resources that are available. You know how to access those resources. So you know, as a CYC, you may be working in an area where it becomes really important to know about the food bank and the clothing drop off and the early years center and the employment office, those elements, it becomes really important to know what resources are available and how to access them. Understanding your role, but also the role of those involved. I said earlier that there's a structure to support collaboration, whether it's you meet every 4 weeks for 20 minutes, or you have an email update. There's just some mechanism that indicates that you're working interprofessionally, maybe once a year, depending on the nature of the relationship. The role-specific mental health literacy. So Tom, I'm using your example again about the doctor is going to have role-specific knowledge that you're not, that I'm not, that a teacher's not, and vice versa. The teacher's going to have a wealth of knowledge about teaching strategies and learning diagnoses, etc. And I might bring, as a CYC to the classroom, a significant knowledge around social emotional well-being or behavioral intervention or crisis management. So we bring with us this almost this invisible briefcase of knowledge based on our role and what we've learned about our role. And we have a good understanding of how to work together and why that's important. Okay, so I'm going to ask you, or I'm not, I don't know why I just prefaced that. What individuals might a CYC work with? Do you think? So you're working with a young person and you're working with them in a group home. You're a CYC working in a group home. What other professionals might be in that young person's life? Chantal.
So I have 2 questions.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, well, okay, so they could be working with a addictions counselor,
yeah,
because of substance abuse issues. Now, I have a question. Within age appropriateness, I guess, are they exposed to like Narcotics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous and like attending meetings and things like that? Or because like from being at meetings, I have seen people as young as like 17 coming into the rooms, and they've been coming since like the age of 14. But I myself growing up, I didn't even know until I got into recovery. I didn't even know NA existed.
I'm going to say that I don't have an answer to you about the age of when you can attend AA and NA, just because I don't have that information in my head. So I don't know, but I think a good point you're making is that in your resource toolkit, you also want to know about age appropriate resources that you can connect them to, or that know that resources exist. That would probably be helpful at telling you what might be available. 16 plus, thanks, Sinead. Tom, good one there. Social worker, CAS. Sinead with the probation officer, they may have a therapist or a psychologist. If English is not their first language, they're newcomers to Canada, ESL might be a type of support that's available. Psychiatrist, if they have a diagnosis and medication, right? So lots of different providers. You don't have to know as a CYC what everyone does, but what becomes important when you're working with them, if you're part of a team that's interprofessionally collaborating, you have those roles spelled out pretty good. You have a good idea of what your role is going to be, what their role is going to be, and how you're collectively helping that person, because that's what it comes down to, positive service outcomes. So as CYCs, what you're doing, what you bring to the table is that relational practice that we do so well, that capacity to build a therapeutic alliance and working relationship. We're more often than not in that young person's life space. So we have access to that assessment data. We have access to make those observations. We have access to hearing from that young person, perhaps their family. We're skilled in communication strategies. That's one of the skills we learn. We take a child client-centered approach and we take a strength-based approach. So with this, that is our position on the team. We bring something that not all other professions bring, because that's not the scope of their practice. It is the scope of our practice. Okay. All right. We're going to do another activity, and that will be our last bit for today. And it's on looking at interprofessional practice and what you might encounter in the field and what your thoughts are. So this is a different type of activity. So let me show it to you. and explain it, okay? So this is, if you've gotten yourself a little distracted, you're gonna wanna bring your brain back because I wanna show you something. So this is in Brightspace. So the activity you're going to do is in Brightspace. I'll leave the same breakout rooms open. You actually, maybe I've heard some people leave. So maybe what I'll do is, or quickly let me know in chat. Do you want me to leave the breakout rooms as is or change them up? I don't want to mess anything up if you've been working well. Okay, so in this activity, you're going to click into Brightspace and you're going to move through the information this way, okay? The whole activity is embedded in Brightspace. So what you're going to do is you're going to read the scenario that's on the next page. You're going to choose 2 other disciplines that you think would be involved in providing service to this young person that you read about in the scenario. You're going to think about what would the primary roles of each professional be in that situation. And you're going to explore possible places where skills and knowledge might actually overlap, where you and the service provider you're working with may have the same information. Number 4 looks at what are some barriers to effective interprofessional practice? What might get in the way of you working collectively and collaboratively? And then find what are some of the benefits to an effective interprofessional practice for this client, okay? So barriers and also benefits. Okay, so then you're going to click through. So you're going to see the scenario. You're going to write your answer in the text box, okay? And you're going to continue through this. You're going to export your text at the end, and it's just going to download everything in a Word document so that you have a history of your work and you can share it with your teammates and you can upload a copy here once you're done. This is not for grades. More just a mechanism to help you keep track of your comments, okay? So like the last breakout room, my suggestion is you choose one person as the note taker who's going to key in the information and export and upload the data. All right, so what I'm going to do, I think, is I'm going to breakout rooms. I'm going to recreate them, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to let you go into the room you'd like to go into. I'm just going to make a bunch of rooms. I'm going to make, how many of us are there? I'm going to make 5 rooms. And you can just join a room that you like. So if you have peers you typically work well with, go for it. If you're open to working with anyone and flexible, go to any room. So I'll give a bit of flexibility. Let's see how this works when it comes to breakout room creating. Okay, so to recap, you're going to Brightspace for this course. You're going to week 1, and you're going to answer the questions that you will find in the activity titled Interprofessional Collaboration Exercise. Work your way through it. You're going to export your answer and upload it here once it's completed. Let's say we have 417, 27. Okay, let's come back at 4:35 and we'll take it up and we'll see where we get, okay? Any questions before you go? Okay, wonderful. I lost everyone, but I think you're there. I just can't find you right now. Okay, there I am. Okay, I was covering my own box. Okay, so breakout rooms are open. Go ahead to any of them, complete this exercise. If you don't care where you go, let me know, raise your hand and I'll pop you into a room and you can work with whoever you land with, okay? The rooms are open now. I see some people are in them. Perfect. Okay. Okay, great.
So are we just joining any room?
Yeah, Tom, if there's peers you find you work well with effectively, go ahead and jump in a room with them. If you're flexible, join any room.
Okay, thank you.
Can you see, Tom? Can you see who's in rooms on your end?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Great. Hey, Noah.
Hi.
Hi.
Yes. Am I
Hi.
alone in this?
You are. do you want?
That's yeah. I'll go join another one. That's no problem at all.
I was just like, oh no, Noah's there by themselves. It's just people jumped in either 2 or 3. So
Yeah, because I figured, I thought, all right, sounds good, all good. All right, so yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay. All right, welcome back. Guys hanging in. All right, I think everyone is here. Okay, you went into 2 big rooms. That worked. It seemed no one panicked or called me in, so it looked like that worked. So let's take a look at the answers. If someone wants to share from the group, I won't type them in or anything, but what other disciplines professionals did you suggest you might be working with when it comes to Tamika's situation? Who did you have? Iman, please.
We suggested an addiction counselor, relationship counselor, a therapist, and a physician.
Good, 4. Anyone have any that Iman's group didn't think of? So we have physician, we have a VAW counselor, relationship counselor of some kind, addictions, therapist. Chantel, please.
So we had also mentioned an ORS, which is also now known as SARS, what used to be the Ontario Addictions Assessment Services, and getting into contact with them in order to do a province-funded treatment facility because she expressed a desire to get clean.
Okay, so I like you look beyond. So you thought, okay, what could she need? Who do I want to bring in to the interprofessional circle? I like that. Iman, you said addictions too, and I didn't say that. So that's great. So out of those professionals, how does your role as a CYC at Windrose, which is a residential facility, differ, do you think? What would the primary role, pick one of the professionals you chose or that Iman represented for your group, and what would make your role distinct from that one? So you fill in the blank. Let's say from an addictions counselor. Let's go with that because that makes sense based on the scenario we were presented. How does your role as a CYC where they are living look different than an addiction counselor they're working with?
You both have 2 different motives. You have 2 different goals, right? The addictions counselor's goal is just to keep you clean. And the CYC has a goal of you to thrive and to continue living and not just existing after being clean.
Okay, so very targeted approach, targeted goal of service delivery, targeted area of expertise too, Shanae, I think you would say. Whereas the CYC's role, especially if you're working where this young person is living, you have a multifaceted role. Excellent. I like that targeted approach. Chantel, please.
To also kind of go along with that, the CYC has more of that. Yes, they have like the personal connection with them, but they also see what their patterns are.
Okay.
Whereas with an addictions counselor, I know from the path that I took, the addictions counselor came after I went to treatment. It was something to continue on with my sobriety and to help me with harm reduction and also triggers and things like that and how to manage triggers and how to deal with them. But that's for like the after effect. Whereas like the CYC, they see when she's drinking, they see when she's intoxicated. Most likely they're gonna see this youth while they're intoxicated and see the degree of their addiction, I guess.
No, it's great. You kind of track us back to where we were at the very beginning, which is the information you have accessible to you to observe and how you observe information and can use that to inform treatment directions, perhaps with the addictions counselor. Because as Shanae was saying, that really targeted approach, right? But the data you have becomes so valuable if we're looking at triggers, usage patterns, etc. You also said something else about timing, and we may find that at certain periods in service delivery, some providers are going to appear and then leave. If they've been able to help that young person maybe choose a harm reduction method or stay sober or learn a skill, their role may be done. So their time with that person may be over, whereas the CYC continues, provides that continued care. I like that connection. No, Amy, not bad at all. It's just a thought I had. So what about Amy had a comment here around, she mentioned that therapeutic rapport, and I question, perhaps the addiction counselor also does that, because for any clinician, they are going to work to establish a working alliance. How they do it though, Amy, to your point, may look very different, because how I develop a relationship with a youth is going to look different than how an addictions counselor in an office setting is going to. So I wonder if that's where your brain was going to. But what else? What do you think about the overlap between professionals? Where might you be bringing shared knowledge to the table? We have relationship building. What else?
Compassion, care, mental health, maybe backgrounds.
Okay, so that kind of that education background you bring to your role, whereas the addictions counselor and CYC aren't actually that far off, are they, in what they're bringing? However, where they've specialized may be different. Good. Okay. Oops, I went the wrong way. And then what do you think the barriers, what do you think might be some of the challenges if we look at the CYC and the addictions counselor? Iman, please.
I would say that sometimes their opinions may be contradictory, and so that we think of a different way to help the clients, whereas the addiction counselors find another way, and maybe that they might contradict. Yeah. So that can be not very helpful for the students.
Okay, the method of intervention could be different. Okay, you made me think of something when I worked. I just realized some of you don't even know who I am in my background. When I worked at a women's shelter, I can imagine myself interprofessionally working with an addictions counselor who was focused on harm reduction, say. But at the shelter, the rule would be, if you're intoxicated, you can't come in, or you can come home, but you can't be out and about in the shelter. And how I'd hear the goal the addiction counselor was working on as harm reduction, and that would be difficult for me in my role to implement. Whether I might agree with it, but in the context and the scope of my role, I might say, oh, but we have a no use policy here, and you're working with her to reduce use, but if to stay here, she has to be clean. So that would be an area where service providers, while collaborating interprofessionally, may have to focus on the larger objective, right? Safety of that person, and work something out there. Any other examples? That just popped into my mind when I was thinking of that. Any other barriers or conflicts you can foresee?
I was thinking like Tom had put in the chat about like physical health, and like that made me think like versus mental health, social or emotional health, like what your focus would be. Yeah, whether you're, and that would also like divert your focus to what you're providing for them.
What a good example. Thanks for highlighting that, Shanae. I totally missed it, right? What is your priority, if you will? What is the primary focus of your service provision? And what is the framework and theory that informs your practice? And does it align? Because that's then going to, what Iman, you were saying, might make the direction of the intervention look a bit different. Because if I'm wanting to focus it and you're wanting to focus on this, ultimately it generally comes down to what's the client willing to focus on. And that's sometimes where you can meet in the middle, is what is the client willing to align with us, willing to collaborate with us to work towards. And then sometimes we can get there. Amy, please go ahead.
Would like the time frame that you're working with the individual be a barrier? Because like if, let's say, yeah, she's open to doing like drug addiction counseling, but she's only willing to do a short-term program, and you've now entered her into a long-term program without discussing it with her, you'd be kind of putting yourself into a boat with no oars. I feel it.
I think that's a really good point, that if you move in a service direction that the young person, the client, isn't willing to move with you towards, you've actually broken down that relationship to begin with. So at that point, it's not even necessarily about interprofessional practice, because even if you wanted the young person to go there, they wouldn't go because they're self-selecting out of. But another barrier, and I think I heard this, Amy, tell me if I'm wrong, is that say Shanae, let's use Shanae anymore because I see your beautiful faces. You are, Shanae, you provide long-term care. Iman, you provide short-term care. But the client really works well with Iman, but they have to leave because their agency says, hey, you got 6 sessions with me and then we have to move you on. So Amy, that could absolutely be a barrier. I think that's where you're going, right? Like if the service provider can't continue to provide the service or doesn't have the ability to, how do you maintain that collaboration? And that's a bigger point around, I think, service breakdown, service delivery breakdown, but a really important one to consider as we are collaborating. Good one, really good one. Victoria, please.
It kind of reminds me of like when I went to see like a social worker. You know how social workers like have like a limited amount of sessions, right?
Yeah.
I think they have like, do they have like 10 sessions?
Depends. Short-term care is usually 12, but resource, like when I was up doing counseling at the resource center, it was theoretically 6.
Because what's it called? I think I had like 12 sessions and I went like beyond as well of what I needed.
Sometimes you can get around that by doing new assessments and having new presenting issues apparent, and then you can continue to provide service delivery. However, some that are ministry driven have very clear guidelines, but that's a really good point there. And then the benefit, right? I think we can, oh, Shanae, I missed that, consent barriers and trust.
Sorry, I just wanted to say the other side of the time frame thing, because I also had a short amount of counseling sessions, and my brother and I were both court ordered counseling for like, it was 6 sessions. So really it was like 6 hours. So it was nothing. So both of us had just been like, well, we just got to wait it out. We don't got to tell this lady anything. Right.
Yeah. And then then you're done. You move on. Absolutely. You raise an interesting point about those that really want treatment run out of time, and those that maybe don't see it as okay, I'm almost done with this, or I'm almost done seeing my probation officer or whatever, right? Yeah, good point. Good insight there. And then I won't spend a lot of time. The benefits are collective care, shared service, timely and reporting and service outcomes. So what you can do, don't worry about this unless you have, when you're using these H5P activities, if you export the text, this is what it looks like. It downloads it to a Word document, which I don't think you're going to be able to see, but then it summarizes all your answers in one. So my suggestion is, if you worked in the document, download it and post it, share it with your group members, if they'd like it. Okay, let's see, we are wrapping up. That's it. So the last piece I want to suggest to you to do on your own when you're done class is to, as CYCs, we bring strength-based practice, client-centered care, relational practice, and we're in that person's life space. This is an opportunity. There's an activity posted for you on Brightspace. It's not graded. If you want to post and submit your answers, I'd love to read them, but it's not graded and it's not required. I just want to make that clear. It is an extension of the lesson. But I know people want to know, am I getting marked on this? And when they're trying to balance life, that's how they decide. So if you go to this week 1, where we're in for this lesson, and you go to the second activity, what it looks at is it brings in our textbook and it looks at page 57. You're going to see there's a series of techniques that, as CYCs, when we're working interprofessionally, this is what we can offer. So this
did this one.
Oh,
I'm looking at it now. My group did this one.
Okay. Is that why you weren't? Okay. No problem.
Related to the scenario.
If you did this one, oh, that's interesting. You know what? That's fine. That works. If you did this one, here's another way of doing it. You can check off the ones you're comfortable using, and then articulate why and how you use these techniques. And what are the ones are you not sure about or not comfortable using, and explain why. And then as you're moving into practice as a CYC in placement, set a goal for yourself on how you're going to practice this technique that you might not yet be comfortable using in your placement. You can as with the other one, if you go to export text, you can print it off for yourself and it can just be a notation you keep with you as you're moving through placement. So that's just an asynchronous activity for you to do. And not required, not handing in. Good self-reflection, and that's a good skill to practice as a CYC. All right. I'm going to thank you all, those faces that stuck around. I know it's hard. 2 to 5 is a hard time period for you, especially if you've had a long day. So thank you so much for keeping your time with me. I will see you next week live here. I'm going to stick around as you leave and I say goodbye. I'm going to stick around if you have any questions for me. Otherwise, I really thank you, and I will see you next week. Okay, you can unmic and say goodbye.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. See you.
Excited for the semester.
See you.
Bye.